Joining us, MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, New York Times opinion columnist David French, and senior reporter for The Bulwark, Will Summers. So, Lisa, is DOJ standing in the way of releasing this redacted memo?
Well, it certainly seems that way, Katie. I mean, we haven't seen it. It is not part of the Epstein files. Now, DOJ's response to that is that Senator Wyden can come and view an unredacted copy of that document whenever he wants to. But again, for Senator Wyden, that's not sufficient because there isn't an explanation as to why it is so heavily redacted in the files as it stands now. And of course, the goal of the Epstein Files Transparency Act was just that, transparency for the public and not just for members of Congress who may not even have that. You know, Katie, we've heard lots of complaints from members on both sides of the aisle that when they go to the Department of Justice to look at the unredacted files, they are leaving behind a digital footprint that the Department of Justice may be using to, in fact, surveil their own efforts to gain transparency into these files. So I can understand why Senator Wyden continues to be frustrated with the lack of transparency from the administration.
So is the argument that what they're doing is they're potentially watching lawmakers as they go in there, taking a look at what these lawmakers are searching, and then potentially using that information to either block or shade the truth later on when they start questioning it, Lisa?
Well, I'm not sure that it goes that far, but Katie, we do know that when Pam Bondi testified earlier this year before the House Judiciary Committee, she was seen with a folder that had some notations on it that seemed to reflect which documents a particular member of Congress had looked at when she had come to the Department of Justice to view them unredacted. That's the sort of thing that has members wondering, are you looking at what we're looking at in order to prepare yourself for an appearance before us, or because you're trying to get information on what's interesting to us and therefore preclude us from seeing more of those things that are of interest? It's not clear to us which direction that goes in, but I can certainly appreciate why that feels fishy to members of Congress who have been told you can see any unredacted file that you want.
What's your reporting, Lisa, on Richard Kahn?
Well, Katie, the reporting that I have today is not only about Rich Kahn, who's one of the co-executors of the estate, who testified last week, but about his other co-executor, Darren Endyke, who was a longtime attorney to Jeffrey Epstein. Rich Kahn is a person that members were very frustrated with his testimony last week. They thought that he was not as forthcoming as he could have been about what signs he might have seen of Jeffrey Epstein's wrongdoing. If they were frustrated with Rich Kahn, they may be doubly frustrated with Darren Endyke. And the reason is because multiple witnesses in the FBI and DOJ investigation of Jeffrey Epstein told prosecutors in the FBI that they had had suspicious interactions with Darren Endyke. In fact, several people told them that Darren Endyke had instructed them, if you are approached by police or if you are approached by someone trying to hand you something, run in the other direction. Do not talk to law enforcement. Do not accept service of process. For a person whose opening statement today was that he had no idea that Jeffrey Epstein was engaged in any ongoing criminal activity, that is hard to square with some of the statements given by witnesses, including some alleged Epstein survivors themselves, Katie.
All right, so Will, the Epstein files, you're the one that's tracking the online reaction to it, what it means for MAGA world, because again, MAGA, this is the base of people who were demanding this transparency. They're the ones that forced this issue into the light of the day that the Democrats are now, running with. How do they feel about the release so far? Do they want to hear publicly from Pam Bondi?
I mean, I think this is an issue that has really hurt Trump with his base. I mean, there's no question this is coming at a difficult time for the Trump coalition. There's anger over Iran, as we saw with Joe Kent's resignation earlier this week. There is persistent questions about affordability and inflation and now gas prices. I think people in the MAGA base, in a way, some of those people have already been drummed out of the party, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, specifically over this Epstein issue. But I think this is something that is still kind of depressing the Trump vote, depressing Trump's base of support. They were so hyped up in 2024 about the Epstein case. People like Kash Patel and J.D. Vance said they would get to the bottom of it. And now, even after the passage of this Epstein disclosure law, we see the administration still dragging their feet on it. And I think that continues among all of the president's other problems to be a problem with the grassroots.
Is there an issue in particular that the grassroots is really concerned about? Is this memoranda that Senator Wyden is talking about the heavily redacted memoranda about the interagency investigation. Has that popped?
You know, I feel like at this point, people are not necessarily following something like that quite as closely on the right, in part because a lot of these right-wing media figures take their marching orders from Trump and they're trying to move on. On the other hand, I do think there's this general sense of disquiet when these stories hit. You see more sort of insurgent right-wing figures like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens who will bring this up as kind of part of their larger grievance against the administration, saying they're running cover for Jeffrey Epstein and these pedophiles. And so I think every negative news story like this continues to be a problem for the administration.
All right, David, let's talk about DOJ itself. Last night, Pam Bondi was with the committee. She testified. She defended the agency's response to the Epstein files, defended the revealing of victims inadvertently within the Epstein files. And now there's talk about potentially James Comer on House Oversight, the chair, withdrawing the subpoena because I guess some Republicans were unhappy with how Democrats behaved in this committee meeting. What does it say to you that there's this back and forth between Democrats and Republicans on this issue that everybody only a few months ago seemed to be fully aligned on?
Yeah, it's really fascinating because the DOJ has become Trump's Praetorian Guard. In other words, that any pretense that the DOJ is somehow quasi-independent, or at least views itself as having some sort of independent existence, which was always problematic given the structure of our government. But sort of this idea that the DOJ has sort of any kind of mind of its own and is anything other than Donald Trump's law firm is receding into the recesses of our memory. And so you've got the DOJ now functioning as a Praetorian Guard. And then the Republicans know that Trump doesn't want to talk about this stuff. And so they will do things like bow to overwhelming public opinion when they first pass the law that obligates the DOJ to release all of this. But then on the day-to-day basis, they still want to do what Trump wants them to do. And so it's precious few members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, who are willing in any way to break with President Trump on a day-to-day basis. They did the big break. They passed the law. But as far as holding Trump's feet to the fire, they're the last people in America who are going to do that. And the DOJ is not the DOJ that we've known most of our lives. Most of our lives, we've known a DOJ that is operating not entirely independently of the president, but has a view of itself as serving the interests of justice more than the interests of the president. And now that's exactly backwards. So, we are in a very strange situation in which MAGA said, Epstein, 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 and then they win the election, and Trump's like, Epstein who? And so MAGA is torn between the Epstein obsession and the undying love and loyalty to Trump, and you're just seeing that sort of back and forth sort of instability playing out in real time almost every day.
Did they walk themselves into a corner here? Because with releasing the Epstein files and the 3 million pages, conspiracies are not going to die from this. You can't release enough information for those conspiracies to die. And DOJ, before even this DOJ, would argue, hey, listen, we don't release this information for a reason, because it contains unverified accusations or accusations that didn't have enough there for us to bring charges. And because of that, did this particular team of people with Donald Trump put themselves in the position of having no way to bat away these conspiracies, and also put themselves, David, in the position of having to further the undermining of trust in an institution like the DOJ?
They walked straight into this. I mean, there's just no question about it. If you go back and you look at the rhetoric before the campaign, you've got Vance, you've got Kash Patel, you've got Bongino, you've got all of these people talking about it. And you have to understand the background assumption that MAGA had was when you lift the lid on Epstein, it's going to blow up the left, that's who it's going to destroy. And so, they've been talking about it relentlessly under this view that it's going to sort of blow up the left. Then Trump wins. Trump, if you notice, was never quite as much into all the Epstein this, Epstein that as a lot of the rest of MAGA was. And so he drags his feet. He calls Epstein a hoax, et cetera. But by that point, the cat was out of the bag. But then the DOJ compounded the problem, because when they did finally start to release, they didn't actually comply with the law quite very competently. A lot of their redactions seemed pretty convenient to Donald Trump as opposed to redactions required by the law. And so then that takes all these people who had no previous interest in the Epstein controversy to say, wait a minute, Trump is calling it a hoax all of a sudden after they ran on it. Now that we've got these creative redactions, what's happening? So they walked into this. This is one of the biggest own goals I've seen in modern political history. But I would also note this is what happens when millions of people wrap both arms around a guy who is a great friend of Epstein. It's not going to go well for you when all of the Epstein stuff starts to come out.
I wonder if the Democrats are walking into the same thing, Will. I mean, this has expanded to include a lot more people who are interested in it than were before this administration won and before they ended up releasing these files, and the Democrats started championing it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a complex issue. I mean, certainly on one hand, obviously, as you mentioned, some other Democrats had Epstein ties, like people like Bill Clinton, others as well. And in terms of the audience, I mean, what you point to here is the idea that Democrats, sort of the Democratic base, is really excited to see proof that Donald Trump was a pedophile, essentially. And is that information out there? It doesn't appear to be quite yet. The idea that there's going to be this big payoff, I think is something that is potentially hanging out there for Democrats. Certainly the idea that Epstein was an intelligence asset, these other things, sort of the maximalist Epstein case. I think Democrats could end up in a situation where they have promised to reveal these big revelations and, whatever the next memo is, that once it comes out, we'll finally get them. And perhaps they're going to end up holding the bag for the Epstein case as well.